Hi, everyone. For this week's discussion, I decided to focus on Arab Americans. To begin, I did a lot of research, and there's a lot out there, and I guess um, I didn't realize how diverse this group is until I started really digging in. When you do start the research, you realize that it's not one single category, but it's people from over 20 different countries with a mix of languages and religions and cultural traditions. Um, but despite that huge diversity, Arab Americans often get lumped together and are generally misunderstood, which leads to some pretty serious challenges. One of the biggest is the most widest known. It's the biggest issue they still face today, which is the racial profiling, especially since 9/11. There's been a lot of, if you think about it, even today, there's been a lot of increased surveillance and suspicion directed towards Arab Americans, and it's had a lasting effect on how safe and accepted they feel in society today. I read a recent study by Audi. It was 2008, but it really resonated because they talked about how this kind of scrutiny can lead to feelings of isolation and mistrust, not just towards the institutions, but even with their in their own communities. And another big challenge is employment discrimination, which is still runs rampant today. Arab Americans often struggle with hiring bias and limited opportunities for advancement, especially if they wear their religious clothing or have names that people associate with certain stereotypes. Hayes and Erford 2018 mentioned how these kinds of barriers can lead to economic instability, and they make it harder to feel empowered in the workplace. Um, when I thought about counseling theory, when I thought about which counseling theory might work the best here, I went back and forth, but I think narrative theory really stood out. Um, it's all about helping clients reframe their personal stories in ways that highlight their strengths and resilience, if that makes sense. I think that it's so important for Arab Americans, especially those who've internalized, they've brought that internally, eh, you know, especially when they internalize those negative societal messages. And that comes from Gehrig 2021, which talks about how this approach helps people reclaim their identity and rewrite their own story on their own terms, which I think is important. I think that narrative therapy fits here. Now, when it comes to seeking counseling, there are definitely some cultural barriers for them. Um, First, I think it's the same one that, from what I've researched, I think it's the same one that it happens for all of us. It's the mental health stigma. Um, Therapy it's seen as shameful and unnecessary, and a lot of people prefer to have family or religious leaders instead. So I think that's a big one here. I think, it's not just, the cultural barrier, but the mental health stigma. And there's also strong concern about confidentiality, especially in close knit communities, where privacy is everything. you know um it was Tedros et al. That it was 2023, a more recent article that explains how these concerns can keep people from reaching out for help. And I really think that's the truth. And as somebody that's becoming, as a future counselor myself, I think the best way to address these barriers is by building trust and cultural competence. I think that's the main key. That means being upfront about confidentiality, respecting religious and family values, and using language that makes therapy feel safe and empowering, if that makes sense. I'd also want to normalize mental health support, maybe through community outreach or even psychoeducation, so people see it as a strength and not a weakness. Um, I appreciate. I could go on forever, but I'm time limited. So thank you guys for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone thinks. I really like your when everybody responds, it's really important to me. I'm going to go ahead and list my references. First, my first reference is Hayes and Erford, 2018. It's developing multicultural counseling confidence, a systems approach. So it's the third edition by Pearson. And then my second reference was Tedros. Um, Ramadan, I think it's Salman and Capetto. It was 2023, and it's therapy with Arab American clients. And I believe that was supporting culturally responsive practice. That was in Psychology Today. It was a Psychology Today article. So I look forward to everyone replying back, and thank you so much.